So the title of my presentation is Patient Advocacy in 3D, or 3 dimensions. Although after listening to Chris's presentation at this time yesterday afternoon on Live Strong and Lance Armstrong's patient advocacy at the UN, I really thought about changing the name of this presentation to how to go from having a Twitter account to changing the world in 3 steps without having to actually have cancer, wear spandex, or compete in a global athletic event. But since I had already submitted my slides, this is what we have. And so patient advocacy in 3D. In case you're wondering, no special glasses are required. This is more of a concept, if you will. Although the question and the concept did come to me from thinking about the movie Avatar. So the question I thought of was, how can we make patient advocacy more like the movie Avatar? That may not be a common question. It may not have occurred to you yet, but work with me here. So what made Avatar, the movie, so great? What made it a blockbuster, life-changing event, award-winning, multi-billion-dollar movie? I think it's really 3 things. It was great storytelling. The content was really amazing. They leveraged cutting-edge technology in the most innovative way. Thirdly, they created a richly immersive and engaging experience that took what had previously been a passive 2D movie that has had a 100-year history and transformed it into something entirely different. So this is what I would love to do with your help with patient advocacy. So what's 1D? What's the first dimension? So we're all very familiar with traditional Day on the Hill. If you participate in advocacy organizations, you have that one day when you roll up everybody to a series of visits with your congressman, or more likely their healthcare staffer, and you pour out your heart and your issues and you make your ask, and there may or may not be follow-up, and they nod their heads, and maybe something gets done, maybe it doesn't. And this is what I was trained in. I had a very traditional advocacy background. As a little girl, I arranged all my stuffed animals and made them cabinet secretaries. You all did that, right? And I went to Harvard undergrad to concentrate in government. At Harvard, we don't major, we concentrate. We think very, very hard about things. And we call it government instead of political science because it's assumed we're going to take charge of something. So I graduated with a government degree at Harvard and walked the streets of Boston campaigning with Kennedy's, very old-fashioned retail politics, so literally very old school, and hopped the train and went to Washington and worked for the League of Women Voters, which, again, cannot get more traditional than that. Although I went at a time when we were working on a little thing that you might remember called Rock the Vote, when MTV was still very new, and we were thinking about how to engage the next generation in politics, in advocacy, how to use new technology, a new medium, to engage differently with voters. And so that was the first glimmer of things. And off I went off to law school, however, after that experience. And so the second dimension came across. So although I had been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, I'm so excited about all the IBD patients here, strong showings today by Brett and Sean. So I had been diagnosed at age 13 with ulcerative colitis. And like Brett, sometime along the way, I lost my colon. Although I think I know where it is, but I gave it up. But it's gone nonetheless. And so I had been a patient of sorts for many years by that point, but really hadn't formed a patient identity. Certainly none of the exciting online communities and activities and technology existed with my first diagnosis. But between first and second years of law school, my liver began to fail, and I had a liver transplant. By the definitions at the time, I had less than a week to live. So when my mother came to my bedside and asked me what I wanted to do, that I had been accepted to law review, I told them, Yes, of course. Tell them yes. I'll be back next semester because I believe something a little different than what the statistics were telling me. And that turned out to be true. Next week will actually be the 17th anniversary of my liver transplant, and so I was very blessed to receive one. So my first foray into social media, online patient interactions was a very old-fashioned, it wasn't even a listserv, it was sort of a bulletin board of transplant recipients. And I actually wasn't even exposed to it. Nobody told me about it while I was waiting or going through the process, but I was actually exposed to it when I went to work for the United Network for Organ Sharing on organ transplant policy. And so I discovered this tool, this little place where transplant patients were sharing information, where I found out exciting things like not every patient had to be on prednisone for years at a time, as I was in my institution, that there was a different mode of treatment, different protocols at different centers. That was eye-opening for me, and something that I went running back to my doctors and saying, I could have cheekbones again? Really? And they, they looked at my lab values. They said, yeah, I guess we could take you off. And so that was the second glimmer, that using information that patients shared with each other through technology could change the course of my clinical care. And so now, of course, as we've heard for the past 2 days, it's commonplace. It's growing. It's not quite spread far enough. But for those of us in this room who use mobile apps, who participate online, who are tweeting throughout this whole conference, we really couldn't think of going back to a day when we didn't have access to online tools and resources to connect with people, not just in this room, not just in the same town or with the same institution, but around the world. So that's the second dimension of health. And so when I thought about what would advocacy look like if we put all of this together, what would be the recipe for patient advocacy in 3 dimensions? If we took a dash of traditional advocacy, added 1 part of technology, and added liberal parts of e-patient activism, what would be the new model for policy making that we would have? Now, I found myself in the situation 3 months ago that I was actually elected chairman of the board of the American Liver Foundation, a traditional patient advocacy organization that for one reason or another for the past 20 years has always been headed by a physician, by a hepatologist. And so here I was, a patient, not only having a seat at the table, but being at the head of the table. So what was I going to do with this opportunity? What am I going to do with this opportunity? The question I ask myself every night is, how do I make this organization truly reflective of the needs of patients in the liver community? How do I make us relevant? What does a patient advocacy organization look like in the 21st century? I work with so many of the people in this room, individual patients and patient activists who are trying to find a voice, trying to find the right structure, the format for expression. We saw on Monday the Social Health Unconference and groups arranging to create an e-patient Bill of Rights and still figuring out what's the right structure, what's the leadership, what's the governance. And then on the other side, I have age-old institutions with infrastructure, with platforms, with assets such as chapters and staff. And I really ask all of us, can we all get along? Can we bring the best of those worlds together to truly amplify, accelerate, and empower the voice of patients to shape policy making? So not only do traditional advocacy organizations have something to offer e-patients as a channel for their energy, but I also see that e-patients certainly have a lot to offer traditional advocacy organizations to enliven us. I think of the many gaps existing in many patient advocacy organizations, and I look forward to sort of unleashing an army of patients monitoring legislation, offering comments, having consistent visits to Capitol Hill and to state legislatures as well. I think that we can probably brainstorm dozens of ways in which individual patients and the online patient communities that we'll certainly hear more about on this panel, but that we've been talking about throughout this conference, can really be brought and connected to traditional advocacy so that we not only have communities, but we really have a force. So my vision, which I hope you share, and I hope during the remainder of my term as chair of the American Liver Foundation, is certainly as remainder of my part of this community, my vision is to broaden the type of patient and the number of patients who are fully immersed in shaping healthcare policy. And I thank you for the opportunity to share that with you today.